Okay, so, okay, so um, today we're going to talk about some factors that you can consider when it comes to grad school and life after Barnard. Here's our agenda for today. First, we're going to introduce our panelists and their own adventures. Next, we'll talk about what it means to choose your own adventure, and we'll discuss some personal decisions that you can make as you begin to plan your next steps. Next, we'll talk about some academic considerations and financial concerns, and then we'll talk about what you can do while solidifying your plans to go to grad school or whatever it is that you think is going to be your next step after Barnard. And of course, we'll wrap up with the Q&A where we can discuss any questions that arise during our chat. I want to take a moment to introduce our panelists for this afternoon. First up is Leanne Fitzner. Leanne obtained her BA in economics from Barnard College in 2015 and is currently in her second semester of Columbia University's MS in Sustainability Management. Leanne came to graduate school to pursue her interest in climate action and to gain the critical analytical skills she needs to pivot to a sustainability-focused career path, ideally in the renewable energy sector. Like Leanne formerly worked as a project manager in financial services, most recently as the vice president of digital operations at Morgan Stanley Wealth Management, where she led efforts to streamline integration of E-Trade's digital tools. In her spare time, she enjoys cooking, especially a pot of beans, shopping at the 97th Street Farmers Market, and exploring various neighborhoods and parks of New York City. Welcome, Leanne. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jody.
Next, we have Annalisa Ruiz, she, her, and hers, who is a PhD student in the Department of Ethnic Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. She is a recipient of the Graduate Division's Chancellor Fellowship and former Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellow. She received a BA in Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies from Barnard College of Columbia University in 2019. While at Barnard, Annalisa was an RA, shout out to the union, a wellness peer educator, a community assistant for social justice and student life, a member of Mujeres, and held various internships. Her research interests lie in Latinx aesthetics, popular culture, women of color feminisms, and questions of belonging and homemaking. Annalisa is from East Los Angeles, California, and now lives in Oakland. Prior to her time at Berkeley, Annalisa had a short and occasionally illustrious career in entertainment, working in film, finance, and podcast development. Welcome back, Annalisa. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in. So raise your little digital hand if you've ever heard of the Choose Your Own Adventure books. Yes, okay, a few people. So for the uninitiated, these were books that were popular in the late 1900s, or as I like to call it, the turn of the century. These weren't like regular books that you would just read from beginning to end, from page 1 to 100. Basically, you would start reading the beginning of the book, read a little bit of the background, and at the end of the introduction, you'd be faced with some choices for where the story would go. And depending on your choice, you would flip to a page that would pick up where the story was going. And you would read that part, make another decision, and flip to another page, and so on until the story is over. So when we're thinking about going to grad school or planning our next steps after Barnard, you can kind of think of it in the same way. Everyone is starting out together, right? We're all here at Barnard. And when you're done, you can make your own way. You can choose your own adventure. So let's talking about who is choosing their own adventure. We have survey data from the last 3 classes of Barnard graduates. So out of Barnard alumni, 23% of grads pursue graduate education of some sort after graduating, 68% enter the workforce, and 9% say that they are still searching. So maybe they're going to go to grad school in the future, maybe they're looking for a job, maybe they're doing something else, but they're still searching, right? When we zoom out to look at stats on degree attainment on the macro level, We see that from the last census report that 10.5% of Americans have a master's degree, 1.5 have a professional degree, and 2.1 have a doctoral degree. So let's talk about what questions that 14% ask themselves to get to where they are. But first, I want to kind of turn to our panelists and get to know them a little bit better. So either of you can jump in whenever you're ready, but I want to know, kind of to frame this discussion, at what point of your life did you just start thinking about going to graduate school, and what made you start thinking about it?
Yeah, I can jump in first. Initially for me, I guess I grew up knowing a lot of people who had been to grad school. So my dad and my mom are both lawyers. So it was something that was always on my mind, but I knew I didn't want to go to law school because they had a lot of complaints about their jobs. So I wanted to go to grad school and continue studying and further my academic knowledge, but I didn't know what I wanted to study at the time that I was at Barnard. And it took me kind of a long time to figure that out. And we can get into that more in another question.
Yeah, kind of similarly, I have a lot of distinct memories of my mom just telling me I was going to get a PhD, which I don't think she really knew what that meant, and I certainly didn't know what that meant, but I agreed because my mom told me. And I think when I was in college at Barnard, I really just was enjoying the intellectual experience of being in a seminar room, and was really enjoying the kinds of questions that was being asked, and kind of took seriously okay, if this is what a PhD is, maybe I do really want to do that. And so I became a Mellon Mays Fellow at Barnard, which is sort of helping to preview what a research experience looks like, and that also pretty affirmed that that was something I was interested in.
All right. And when did you decide that you were definitely going to graduate school?
Well, for me, I decided kind of unfortunate timing, right before the COVID pandemic, I was like, okay, this is the year that I'm gonna apply to grad school. I'm so excited because I finally was at a point in my career where I had felt like I learned a lot and gained a lot of project management type skills. And then I was realizing I've been working in the financial services industry, and this industry isn't super aligned with my interests. So I wanted to kind of pivot, go back to grad school in order to pivot and be able to do that. But then when COVID happened, it kind of delayed everything a little bit. So I actually ended up starting grad school in fall of 2022. So just last semester.
All right. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Do you need? I can not.
No. Go ahead.
Yeah, I decided to apply during the pandemic. I, was feeling kind of similar. I'm not very comfortable with my job, or just not fulfilled. And also was sort of potentially facing a promotion, decided if I wanted it to begin with. And I realized that grad school was a better option for me at the time. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Okay. So, as you're thinking about graduate school, there are some questions that you should consider about yourself as a person and your decision to attend graduate school. So we've kind of already heard from our panelists. We heard some job stuff. We heard some, kind of now or never kind of stuff. We heard about the pandemic. So there are a lot of different personal factors that can contribute to your decision to attend graduate school. So those can be related, like I said, to career choice, finding your why or your reason to do this, understanding the role the community or your network plays in your decision making, and then finally questions about timing. So these are all things that you should kind of start asking yourself when you're thinking about graduate school. What role is this going to play in my career? Do I need to go to graduate school? Okay, I need to go to graduate school. Do I need to go now or can I wait? What are some of the consequences of waiting? What are the consequences of going now? What is my why? I'm sure Annalisa will talk about this a little bit, especially on the PhD track. It gets a little bit tough. And if you don't understand your why, it can be easy to kind of walk away from it. So kind of understanding your why should be part of your decision-making process. Community plays a huge role for some people. Some people are very community-minded. So if you, for example, have a role in caretaking for your family, or you have to stay close or something like that, what role is community playing? And then I also am thinking about community on the grad school side. Are you going to a community, or are you going to a place where you're going to be able to find your community? These are things to think about. And then, of course, timing. So, a lot of people go to graduate school right after undergrad, which works for a lot of people, especially if the job that you're interested in requires a graduate degree. You can't be a doctor right out of undergrad, thank God. There are things that you need to kind of do in the meantime. But for some people, they need to work, or they want to work, or they want to gain some other skills. So I want to turn to our panelists and kind of like back up. And I want to know a little bit about your career plans. What are your career plans, and how does grad school figure into those plans for you?
Yeah, so for me, right after, I'll back up to right after Barnard graduation, or I guess my last semester at Barnard, I really wanted to stay living in New York City. And for me, I felt like if I went to graduate school right away, I wouldn't be able to afford to live in New York City. So for me, it was sort of a logical choice. Okay, find a job so that I can start to get some income and then think about it later. And I think having a job helped me figure out what I did and didn't want out of my career. So I just kind of went with that in financial services, like I mentioned. So I ended up working in financial services for 7 years on multiple different companies and teams and projects. And it was really awesome experience, but ultimately decided that I do want to pivot and work in sustainability, something sustainability related, ideally renewable energy. So I figured I actually started looking at a lot of jobs to see if I would be able to transition to another career path without going to grad school. And I wasn't really finding jobs at the level that I was performing at in my current job. And a lot of jobs in a new industry wanted me to basically start from entry level. And I know a lot of people who've done that, and it can work out really great. But for me, I was looking for something where I could kind of operate in more of a higher level, but also realized like, oh, in order to do that, they want to see that I either have some knowledge or some direct experience in this industry. So for that knowledge piece, that was what really led me to go back to grad school, because I figured I'm going to kind of gather up a lot of these new tools from grad school that I can then combine with my project management experience and bring into a new career path. So ideally, that'll be the case after this awesome grad program.
So should I go or should I? Okay. So yeah, my career plans. So they're very loose. I'll say that right now. It's very hard to say because the PhD program is long. So I'm in year 2 and we'll hopefully have 4 more. And that's me being like ambitious and trying to hurry up. So it's very hard to say what will happen in the next 4 years, other than hopefully me finishing my program. But as far as career-wise, like I think I'm a little bit more atypical in an academic setting. So I'm not necessarily interested in being a professor. Like I am treating the PhD program as sort of an opportunity to do research, to ask intellectual questions, to be in community with people that I think will push me as a thinker. And I'll also say that I'm kind of treating it as like a sacred time to actually write and to produce things that I wanted to do. So as Jody said, I was working in entertainment previously, and I thought that I wanted to just sort of stay in that realm, but was really frustrated with sort of the lack of honestly thought that went into a lot of storytelling and a lot of like real consideration for what the impact of various stories are, and whether that just be like a romantic comedy or something a little bit heavier. You know, I think that there is sort of a lack of thinking a little bit deeper about what stories do and mean for us. So part of why I decided to go into a PhD program was not only just to learn, but just so that I could do the work that I was asking other people to do, and really sort of think more about like the craft of storytelling from a more like fuller research perspective, which is kind of I'll say is a not common approach, and it's also just not common in academia. Like there are lots of people that do sort of more like journalistic writing. It's not necessarily the path that screenwriters take or anything like that, which is not necessarily what I want to do. But I say all that to say that how I see this figuring into my plans is that this is the time for me to really hone in and practice writing. And this is also the time for me to develop like a philosophical lens, at which I'm sort of seeing and understanding the world. And also is, trying to think about these larger academic questions that I can break down for a general audience through a different medium than school.
Yeah, and I think kind of on a similar note, I think you kind of have maybe talked around it a little bit, both of you, but I want to know a little bit about, if there are ways that aspects of your identity influenced your grad school decision-making process.
Yeah, Annalisa, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, I will say for sure being Mexican, I like identify as a Chicana. I, was really also struggling in the corporate space. At my particular company, it was not a good time, but I think that, and I think, I mean, at Barnard, you hear on and on and on, but it really is true. Like being a woman also really changes and shapes your experience. And I'll be honest, like I wasn't taken seriously. And not that I'm necessarily taken very seriously as an academic in a big picture sense, but in my program, like there are only people of color, and like I'm at an academic institution where it's pretty easy to I guess silo yourself as far as like if I only want to interact with other students of color, that is very feasible. And that to me has made a really big difference, that I'm in a setting where my ideas are taken seriously, where I have the like room to kind of exhale and be, and not am constantly on the defense, which is really, really nice.
Yeah, I can definitely I guess agree with the point of like, as a woman, a lot of times the role models or the people who I was working with in the financial services industry weren't exactly doing things that I felt like I wanted to do as a leader. A lot of times, like I was really lucky in that like my own direct manager was a woman, and she was super inclusive, and she was trying to create opportunities for everyone on our team. But that was something that I was looking for more of at like higher levels of leadership. And so I'm still like trying to figure out exactly what that'll look like, but I felt like the community at Columbia in the sustainability program was a lot of people who are really focused on like mission-driven work. And so I was looking for a little more of that than I was getting in finance.
Yeah, and I kind of want to go back a little bit in terms of timing. It sounds like timing and career choice kind of coalesce for both of you in terms of you're thinking about graduate school. So you kind of, it seems like both kind of hit a wall, like a kind of a career wall, whether like a glass ceiling maybe of like, I can't really move any further. Or I can't be respected unless I move on with a graduate degree. Um, is that like a good
Yeah,
summarization?
yeah, partly. Like for me, I felt like I could move on in the sense of like I could do things the same way and continue to be successful, but I guess I was also looking for something more in terms of like uh more like value aligned with my own values too. But yeah, that was definitely part of it of like, okay, I'm not going to learn really anything new or different here at this point.
Were there things that you wanted or needed to accomplish before going to graduate school?
I think for me, like I wanted to make sure I wanted to go back. Which is to say, like, I kind of mentioned earlier, like my mom told me I was going to get a PhD, which it was like, okay, so do I want to do this because like I want to do this, or am I doing this because like, oh, I was told to do it? And I did a program in undergrad that kind of made it like set it up so that way it would be like not easy, but easier for me to go on this path. And um I made it a point to like spend a good amount of time like working, or not a great amount of time, but enough time to sort of just know, like, yeah, I've tried this, I don't love it, or it's not working for me in XYZ way. And that I think is really, I think that's what I needed. I wouldn't say I've like accomplished anything. I think similar to Leanne, like I learned a lot and there are skills that will stay with me and that's good and great. But more than anything, what I wanted was like certainty in my own voice and in my own perspective.
Okay, thank you both. Let's now pivot and talk about academic considerations. An overarching question that you should be asking yourself is, how is your academic portfolio setting you up for your next steps? So the good news is that you don't always have to choose a major that's directly related to what you want to do professionally. And I'll use myself as an example. As an undergraduate, I was a Latin American and Caribbean Studies major. And while I super love that major, and if you ask me today, like I've been to school a million times, but that's always my favorite major. It has nothing to do with what I'm doing right now as a higher education administrator. However, there were things that I did as an undergrad that have helped to prepare me for further education. So I took classes that required a great deal of research and writing. And the research has helped me in my further degrees, and my writing has helped me professionally. I've even like worked as a writer before. So even though I'm not doing work directly related, I kind of set myself up for success further down the road. If your major is unrelated to your career choice, you can think about how you can set yourself up to connect the dots with graduate school. So once you've considered your potential career path and academic paths you'll need to pursue, think about your academic record, okay? Are you taking challenging courses that will prepare you for the rigor of graduate level education? Do you feel good about your grades? And keep in mind, you don't have to have a 4.0 to pursue graduate school. I would say that unlike undergrad, there can be some flexibility because graduate schools are thinking about fit over GPA necessarily. But you should feel like you're academically prepared for the rigor of graduate school. You'll also want to think about who's going to write my letter of recommendation, my letters of recommendation. I put this under academic considerations, even though it's possible that you might include other folks that are outside of the academy. But for the most part, especially if you're applying closer to undergrad, it is an academic concern. So you're going to want to think about who you're making connections with while at Barnard. Third, you are going to want to think about research experience. If you're going into an academic program, it's likely that you are going to have to produce your own research. So are you prepared for that? If you're not prepared for it at the undergrad level, are there ways you can get that research experience before entering graduate school? Next, you want to think about the kind of program that you want to enter. An academic program, such as a master's or a PhD, or a professional program like an MD, JD, EDD, even some MSW degrees, things like that. Once you've decided that, you can start to research the structure of the program. For example, some master's degrees require a thesis and some don't. Some programs are more structured than others, and some require an internship and some don't. Think about what will serve your needs. So thinking about the future, thinking about your career, how is the program going to serve your needs? And then finally, testing. Many graduate programs, regardless of the type, require some kind of testing. So, MBAs require the GMAT or the GRE, law schools require the LSAT or the GRE, and then some master's and PhD programs require the GRE. So you want to make sure that you understand that requirement. I will say that a lot of master's and PhD programs are eliminating testing requirements. So that's something to think about as well. So I want to turn to the panelists and ask a little bit about how/if your major at Barnard relates to your path of study at the graduate level.
For me, I would say, so I studied economics in undergrad, and I would say economics relates to a lot of different disciplines. So I'm in an energy markets class right now that's really focused on the economy for energy. So some of the things I learned in undergrad are really coming back to me as helpful, but it's not directly related. So it's kind of building off of some pieces of it, but I'm also learning a lot of brand new information, and I'm finding it relatively accessible overall. Difficult to keep up with the readings, but definitely accessible to someone who didn't have the same or similar a sustainability major in undergrad, can still be very successful in my grad program.
I'll say for me, I was a women's gender and sexuality studies major, and I have come to the realization that that program not over prepared me for graduate school, but really well prepared me for graduate school, because it's the program at Barnard is pretty theory heavy, and is theory heavy in a really diverse sense. So you read a lot of it is an interdisciplinary department. You read sociology, you read cultural studies, so people that think about art or music or film or whatever, and then you read Marx and blah blah blah. So I got a really good breadth that I think set a great foundation for me. I will say that I went from one interdisciplinary program into another interdisciplinary program, and so I think there are thankfully lots of pathways of entry. And for me, it's been a beautiful transition intellectually. And so, yeah, I would say even though it doesn't necessarily align, a lot of the structures and pathways are kind of similar.
And how did you find out? So it seems like you both, Barnard, kind of prepared you in different ways to enter into this. So how did you find out how to academically prepare for graduate school? Or did you find out? Was it just kind of vibes? Did you just kind of like hope for the best? Yes. Okay. So,
Yeah.
all right.
I think I talked to you actually, Jody, last year when I was like working on my application, because
Oh
I was
my gosh. This is embarrassing.
wondering, I was like, am I prepared? I have no idea. So I think that was helpful, just tapping into your like the resources that Barnard has available. For me, I found that really helpful.
Thank you. Leanne was not paid to be here. Leanne came here on her own time. Just saying that, but thank you. I appreciate you saying that. I think that it can be a little bit daunting because we think about graduate school as being on like such a high pedestal. And of course it is different. There's a different level of academic rigor, but also like people do it. So people are able to kind of, make that leap from undergrad to graduate school. So that's good to know. So how did you start thinking about how your research interests related to academic programs?
For me, I don't do much detailed research, so probably, probably not the best like and to answer this one, but I do find that like in grad school I'm having to do a lot of research again, and I'm finding it really fascinating because I'm just like diving into these topics that I have no experience in. And so I think, in general, like the curriculum at Barnard was really rigorous too and prepared me in that sense, but no specific like field of research for me.
Yeah, I think for me, w- just for a little bit of background, like I study Mexican American women's aesthetics. So visual, like literally like fashion, makeup, hair, things like that. And I think about how that's sort of like linked to a political project. And that is, I think for me, when I realized like that is a research project and that's an academic question, was kind of recognizing like I wanted to have a conversation about what it's doing, like what is it doing? And that was a conversation that I couldn't necessarily have in a like an artistic way necessarily, or not exclusively in an artistic way. And that sort of led me, I think, to really break down like, so what are the moving parts of this? And so for me, it's like there's something going on with race, there's something going on with gender, there's something going on with performance and the body. And that is sort of what helped me think about like, what are the sort of academic paths to follow those questions. So when I was applying to graduate school, like I applied to American Studies programs, a Chicanic Studies program, ethnic studies, and that was sort of how I figured into like how research maps or what my research questions like align with what academic fields, was really breaking it down, like what are the parts here? And I think that's kind of the best way to go about it.
Thank you both. And then finally, in terms of academic considerations, can you talk a little bit about your letter of recommendation writers? Who were they and what was your relationship, or like how did you develop a relationship with them?
Yeah, I had one reference from my job. So I had my manager write a recommendation, and I felt like that made sense because I had been working for 7 years after school. But then I was a little nervous about this, but I was encouraged to also get an academic reference. And so I went back to my thesis advisor from Barnard, and I hadn't talked to him since soon after graduation, but I reconnected and I told him, this is what I've been working on and this is why I'm looking to grad school. Here are some programs I'm applying to, and, would you be comfortable writing a recommendation? And he was, and so I was glad that I reached out to him, because I know for grad school, it is great if you can get an academic reference, even if you've been out of school for a long time.
I went the all academic route because I didn't want to ask my boss for a letter of recommendation. So I asked Monica Miller, who is the head of the Mellon program, or is still the head of the Mellon program at Barnard. I asked two women's studies professors. So one was someone who advised my thesis, and then one was someone who I had taken a few classes with. So I thought that they both kind of just saw different versions of my work. So like my thesis obviously is like the long paper, but for the one that I was just in seminar classes with, like she always let us do more kind of creative final projects. And so that I thought was really good, that she could sort of speak to this other aspect of my work that I was definitely going to keep bringing up. That I think also mattered, was sort of thinking about like who has seen me in different capacities or has been exposed to my work at different levels.
Yeah, you really have to think about who can kind of talk about you in different ways. And it seems like you both had done a really good job of having someone talk about your academic aspects, but also, and especially for Leanne, the practical aspects of your job. Or your ability to do kind of work at the next level. So that's definitely something that folks should think about, is when you're picking your kind of group of recommenders, having kind of people that can talk about the various aspects of yourself. Can someone talk about how creative I am? Can someone talk about what a good writer I am? How I implement good ideas, or how I'm able to kind of see some of the issues or the gaps, and how to bridge them. So it's really important that you think about all of these different aspects of yourself, and what you want a graduate school to see, and how those recommenders can represent those different factors. All right, so next, let's talk about money, honey. Some things that you'll want to consider when it comes to financial concerns are program costs, the opportunity costs of pursuing graduate school versus working, living expenses while you're in graduate school, and career prospects of the career that you're pursuing. So you're going to want to research program costs. Every school has a place on their website where they list tuition and fees for each program. If you know that you will need to plan to finance your education, you're going to want to take a look in advance so you can have an idea of what you're getting yourself into. There might be scholarships and other financial resources available at the graduate level, so don't fret about that. But of course, you're going to want to familiarize yourself with the terms and conditions. Working. Are you going to be able to work while you're in school? For example, during law school, you are not able really to work in your first year. So you kind of have to think about how you're going to be able to finance that. If you work while you were in school, you kind of have already thought about how you can maybe translate those multitasking and kind of organization skills to the graduate level. It's going to be similar, going to school, and doing work or doing an internship or something else. So you've already gotten practice if you're already working right now. Living expenses. If you're moving to a new city, you're going to have to think about the cost of living. Luckily, New York City is one of the most expensive cities in the world. So hopefully you can live somewhere that's a little bit less expensive during your graduate years. But in New York, of course, we have a robust public transportation system. So if you're moving to another city, you might need to have a car, or, think about Ubers or something like that. So there's a lot of different ways that you should start thinking about finances. Finally, career prospects. Will this be worth the sacrifice financially? And I guess it's hard to say that for many careers, but you should start thinking about it, especially if money is a big concern for you. There's a website called the Occupational Outlook Handbook, where you can actually look up the average salary for a profession, and you can see the forecast for each career. So spending a little money for higher education, paying a higher career, or a career that is a great prospects, that has great prospects for the future, might be worth the investment. So my questions for Leanne, or one of my first question for Leanne and Annalisa what are some of the financial factors that you considered while thinking about attending graduate school?
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered everything I was thinking about, Jody, in terms of the tuition costs, reviewing whether there's any scholarships offered. I looked at opportunities to work through the school, on campus, or as a TA. So I'm a TA this semester, which is definitely helping with living expenses. And then, yeah, it definitely, I took a long time thinking about whether I wanted to do grad school full-time or part-time, because that's an option in my program. And I ultimately decided going full-time would be getting me to my goal of transitioning my career more quickly. So I decided to do that, even though I think financially it would have been more, I guess, easy to manage if I had stayed at my old job and just taken 1 or 2 classes a semester. So I did kind of weigh the pros and cons there and try to figure out how to balance it. And then also talked to family and have been able to get like some family loans that I don't have to actually pay like high interest rates on. So, you know, if that's an option, if you have resources that you can, you know, people you can tap into, I think it's always better than having huge interest rates looming over your head. So there were definitely a lot of considerations that went into the financial aspect.
So ideally a PhD program is funded, which means it is your job, and you get paid. Now you're not gonna get paid a lot. So that's a real consideration, especially when you go to Barnard and you have a lot of friends that make a lot more money than you do straight out the gate. So I mean, in a spirit of transparency, like I make around 40,000 a year, which is actually great for a PhD student. I'm rich, but for a regular person, it's not great, and it's not bad. I will say that like I am rent burdened. I live in the Bay Area, so you know, like my rent right now is more than it was when I was living in New York, which is wild, considering that it's not New York. And so I will say that like part of my financial decision making was really having to consider, for me personally, am I okay with this? Like you know, I didn't grow up necessarily with a lot of money, and even when I was working in a corporate space, I was making marginally more than I do now. But it is really, I think in a US context, it is really hard to be like, I'm 25, 27, and I'm still making like what I was making when I was first out of college. And so to your point, Jody, is like, do you want to work more? What are the like offsets of that? It's a real like day by day decision. Like there are some times when I feel like I have so much going on with school that the thought of like I'll occasionally do like freelance copy editing. Like the thought of reading somebody's article and proofreading it makes me want to cry. And then there are other days when I'm like, shit, I should get like a retail job. Like I have so much time, I have so much energy. Like I want to get out of the house. Like it's a real day by day thing. So I will say that if you do go the PhD route, like you will get told what your sort of like pay will be for the next hopefully 5-ish years. So looking at that and really thinking about like, is it worth it? Like I got into a program that was basically offering me 20,000 a year. And I was just like, there's no way. Like I'm not gonna, you can't live. Like that's just too much. And I can't have a full-time job. So yeah, I do think it's it's for me at least more of the mental thing of, am I willing to be broke for a little bit longer slash maybe forever.
Well, thank you so much to both of you. I know that it is extremely difficult to talk about finances, but like it is a real concern. And, especially, the three of us are all in very high cost of living areas. And Annalisa kind of brought up the fact that she was offered $20,000 and had to kind of walk away from it. Like, you really have to be honest about, like, all right, what is my rock bottom? How expensive is it going to be for me to live here? I need to have fun occasionally. I need to, if you're away from home, I need to be able to fly home. I need to buy new shoes. I need to, whatever it is. So you really have to think a lot about financial concerns. And I recommend talking to people about it. Again, I understand that it's like a kind of uncomfortable conversation sometimes, but talking to your family, who knows, maybe there's somebody that can give you a no interest loan, or maybe they can kind of help you figure out how you can make things work if it seems like maybe they're not going to work. So I recommend, even though it, can be a big hump to kind of go over. And I know for me, it was very difficult. And I was even telling Annalisa earlier that part of the reason that I made some of my grad school decisions were that I was a low income first generation person, and I didn't realize that things like PhD programs were funded kind of across the board. So I was offered funding and I had to kind of go down a certain track and a certain time frame, because I didn't realize that I could kind of do whatever I wanted and still, kind of make out probably in the same way. So definitely talking to people to understand your options is something that I would highly recommend. So we have given you a lot to think about, but the truth is that you don't have to make a decision right now. We saw that, you know, you can enter the workforce, you can decide to do something else. And one thing that you'll want to do is turn to some trusted resources. So we have our Barnard network. Of course, we have the Beyond Barnard office. We have the grad school toolkit, and then other events like this one. We have faculty and staff who are going to be super important for you to talk to in terms of finding a program that's going to be a good fit for you. Asking questions about things like, hey, what are some of the salaries that I might expect as a graduate student? What are some projects that I might want to work on, etc. Barnard alums, like the two that are on this call, are great resources. And then Barnard Connect, which is our kind of platform, our LinkedIn kind of platform just for Barnard folks to be on. You'll also want to turn to your personal network. So we have LinkedIn, of course, internship and work connections. So we already have heard from both of our panelists that being at work either will negatively or positively push you towards graduate school. But for Leanne, it worked out. Leanne got a letter of recommendation from one of her folks. So don't be afraid, like definitely test the waters, but don't be afraid to talk to folks that you work with about going to graduate school. And then of course, family and friends are really good resources as well. And then in your extended network, your e-network, we have the Occupational Outlook Handbook that I talked about. Professional organizations are really good guides for, where should you go, how should you go, what timing, etc. Journals and publications are good places to follow your favorite scholars and figure out what they are. References, so when you've met people, asking them who they recommend that you talk to. And then financial planners. Again, it's difficult to think about money, but talking to a financial planner who is like kind of a neutral third party can help you understand like what you should be thinking about and what you should be doing. So, all right. So for our panelists, let's see. Did anyone who did you turn to? Who were your like aces? Who were your main folks that you felt like you needed to turn to when you were doing this process?
I think the short answer is anyone who would listen, but because I could just talk forever. But more specifically, like my best friends, like the people that I thought knew me as I am right now, like saw me as a student, saw me as like a worker. And definitely like the people that wrote my letters of recommendation. I think their input was also really helpful from the more academic side of it. So they were the ones that sort of knew like the reputations of schools or like the professors that I could be working with and things like that. And I think my friends were the people that sort of grounded me in the like, you need to be in a place where you can go out, or you need to be in a place that the sun is out, or XYZ thing. So I think both those groups of people were really important. But again, anyone who could hear me talk, I would tell.
Yeah, similarly, I talked to a lot of my friends from Barnard who I've stayed in touch with, and a lot of them have been to grad schools and all kind of different areas, some PhD, some different master's programs or law school. And so I wanted to get their take and their perspective on like grad school and, knowing me, is this the good fit for me? And then I also reached out to some people on LinkedIn who I saw in a couple of grad programs that I liked, that I thought I liked, so that I could try to figure out if it would be a good fit for me. And that was helpful too. I found a lot of people are really willing to talk about themselves. So if you have a question and you want to get to know somebody and you see them on LinkedIn, just reach out. I know I do that sometimes if people reach out to me. So I definitely recommend that. But then also, of course, family and friends.
Yeah, highly recommend reaching out to folks on LinkedIn. People tend to be super interested in helping. I reached out to y'all through LinkedIn and you very happily responded. So definitely recommend LinkedIn or using your connections to find more connections. Like, don't be afraid of that. It might seem weird, but we all do it. All right. So let's see. So as I said before, there's a lot to think about, but you don't have to make your decision now. 3/4 of Barnard students don't go, or Barnard grads don't go directly into graduate school. They do something else before, or they don't go, right? So here are some things that you can do while you're thinking about your next steps. You can enter the workforce. If you can find a job related to the field that you want to be in, that would be even better. Your time in the workforce might prepare you for some of the issues that you might face in graduate school if you decide to go. There are also some jobs that will pay your tuition if you decide to go back to school. So for example, one of the biggest perks about working at a college or university is what's called tuition remission, which is basically you work for the school and they pay for you to get another degree. So that's something that you can think about. Internships are a great way to see what actually goes on in an industry without making a long-term commitment. Independent study. So if you're interested in grad school, so you can study a topic and not necessarily for career prospects, you can also spend some time researching the topic on your own. You can take classes at a community-based organization, attend conferences, and go to lectures. So even me, like I love to go to a talk. I love to go to different events at my alma mater or at Barnard or at Columbia. So these are ways that you can still enrich yourself intellectually while preparing or thinking about if you want to go to grad school. Fellowships and grants are great programs. So there's like the Fulbright that will pay for you to do research or teach abroad. Beyond Barnard has resources to talk about fellowships and other international post-graduation opportunities if you're interested in that. Service year, that's a great opportunity to serve your community and think about what your next steps are going to be. And then post-bac programs. These can be special programs for folks who need to prepare themselves academically for the next step of their career, or alternatively, Barnard has post-bac programs for their one-year programs for folks to work on campus before they, figure out what the next step of their journey is going to be. So y'all have talked a little bit about your kind of in between Barnard and grad school activities. Do you want to say like a little bit more? Like, how did you think about how this, or did you think about how your job would relate to graduate school?
My job definitely didn't, which is totally fine. But I do think I will say two things. I think another layover plan that I think people should really take seriously is doing nothing for as long as you can. I think for the most part, we don't necessarily think about the fact that like a lot of us go to school from the time that we're like 5 years old until the time that we graduate, which is a very long time. And college especially is very difficult. And so whether it be like 2 weeks of you doing absolutely nothing, or months, or if you can stretch it to a year or two, do that, because that level of just like rest and calm and like no responsibilities, except to like keeping yourself, alive and healthy, is really, really beautiful. And I think will also give you a certain kind of clarity about like what is it that you want to do. So I think truly resting is a great layover plan. And I'll say, as far as like, did work sort of help me get into grad or like align with my grad school plans? No. But I think that like kind of in the same way of rest, like the postgraduate moment is a time when you really have like to do really whatever. Like for the most part, a lot of folks when they graduate aren't married or in necessarily very serious partnerships. They might not have children. Maybe your parents are not at an age where you need to think so much about elder care or anything like that. So if you do have a more flexible situation, I would say take advantage and do whatever you think is interesting to you. Because yeah, it is a lot harder. Like it's harder for me right now as a grad student to be like, "Ooh, I want to go on a trip." Like, well, got to plan around spring break, or like, things like that. So, I really do think this is the time to kind of indulge, and like, it feels really difficult to say like, don't strategize and don't think about your next move. But you really are so young, and it really is time for the most part. So I think it's a really precious opportunity to like just explore and do whatever it is that you want, or think you might be interested in doing.
Yeah, thank you for talking about that. Rest is super important. And, I think there can be a lot of pressure for folks to go straight through. And like, I don't know about y'all, but the last 3 years have been exhausting for me. And it's okay to rest. Grad school will always be there. It's never going anywhere. It's literally been around, since Alexandria. So, it's okay to take a few weeks, months, years, whatever, resting and regenerating and thinking about what your next move is going to be. All right, so let's wrap up. All right, so we've talked about choosing your own adventure. Let's talk about next steps. So, of course, is first me search. Really ask yourself what you want for this and the next stage of your life. How do you see yourself living? And really be honest with yourself about that. Next, research. Research professions, schools, academic programs, geographic areas, etc. Right? You want to make sure that this move is going to be the right move for you. Prepare for your next steps. If you're in your first year, you can start thinking about the direction you want your academics to go in. You can join clubs that relate to your interests. You can start talking to professors that might write a letter of recommendation for you. In your sophomore year, you might want to explore internships, decide on a major, look into doing some research if that's appropriate for your area. You can also start thinking about which professors are going to be good resources for letters of recommendation. As a junior, you're going to want to make sure you're exploring your interests inside and outside of the classroom, keeping in touch with those same professors. and making relationships with new professors. And in your senior year, you can start making decisions about whether or not you want to continue your education right after undergrad, or if you want to take some time off in between. Making connections is super important. So we've already heard from our panelists that they've made connections with Barnard folks, other professors, or professors around the university, professors outside. It's really important that you make those connections. And then finally, you can and should connect with us at Beyond Barnard. You can either do a one-on-one appointment. We have regular scheduled appointments, walk-in appointments. And then we have our grad school toolkit, which we have the information for right here. If you're an alum, just email me and I can give you access. This is where we've gathered all of our resources and we also advertise grad school events that we find out about on campus and off campus. We have some upcoming graduate school events. This Thursday, we're going to be going to Columbia Business School to visit and have another student panel. So that's at 12, from 12 to 1:30. Next week, we'll have a funding, or no, the week after, we'll have a funding your graduate education seminar. We'll have folks from financial aid come and talk about the nuts and bolts about planning financially for graduate school. And then finally, choosing the graduate schools that are right for you. I promise I can read. I've gotten this far somehow. So that's going to be on April 3rd. So this is kind of going to be a continuation of this conversation that we've had. We're actually going to get into the nitty-gritty of finding a good program match for you. So we definitely invite you to come back and attend those things. So finally, I want to thank Leanne and Annalisa very much for coming. If you have questions, please feel free to email me. Here's my email address, and thank you all.